The photograph arrived in my mailbox 3 days ago. No return address, just a manila envelope with my name typed on a label that looked 50 years old. Inside was a single image, grainy, black and white, stamped with a date I recognized immediately. April 14th, 1970. The day Apollo 13 supposedly malfunctioned. I'm writing this from a Motel 6 outside Alamogordo, New Mexico, because my house in Houston burned down yesterday. The fire marshal called it electrical, but I know better. The envelope came first, then the phone calls, silent ones just breathing and a faint mechanical hum underneath. Then my office at the Space Center was ransacked. Nothing stolen, just rearranged. Papers shuffled. My coffee mug moved from the left side of my desk to the right. Small things, things that say we can reach you whenever we want. My name is Arthur Cunningham, and I was a flight dynamics officer at NASA's Mission Control during Apollo 13. Not the famous guys, not Gene Kranz or the ones who got movies made about them. I was third shift backup, the guy who monitored telemetry data when nothing was supposed to happen. The invisible man in a room full of geniuses. Except something did happen. Something they've spent half a century burying. The official story, oxygen tank explodes, crew barely makes it home, American ingenuity saves the day. That's about 30% true. The rest is a lie built on top of older lies, classified under protocols that don't officially exist. I signed papers in 1970 that threatened me with treason charges if I ever spoke about what I saw on those monitors during Lovell's final transmission from the far side of the moon. But here's the thing about being 78 years old with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Treason doesn't scare you anymore. The photograph shows something they told us was a camera malfunction. A blur across the lunar surface, they said. Light refraction, they said. We were ordered to delete it from the logs, remove it from the database, pretend those 30 seconds of footage never existed. But I kept a copy, hid it in a safety deposit box in El Paso for 5 decades, never looked at it once after 1970, tried to forget about the shape in that image, the way it seemed to move between frames even though nothing on the moon should move like that. Then last month, someone leaked a different photograph online. Same date, same impossible shape. And I started having the dreams. Every night, I see it getting larger, not closer, larger, like it's growing, expanding across the lunar surface like a stain. In the dreams, I'm back in Mission Control, and Lovell's voice crackles through my headset. Houston, it's following us. I have maybe 3 months left to live. The dreams tell me that's exactly how much time we all have. This is everything they didn't want you to know. April 13th, 1970. 9:47 p.m. Houston time. I was eating a turkey sandwich at my console when the first transmission came through. Not the famous Houston, we've had a problem line that everyone knows. That came later, after they'd already scrubbed the original recordings and replaced them with sanitized versions. The real transmission was 6 hours earlier. My shift supervisor that night was a man named Walter Drummond, a Korean war vet who'd worked Gemini missions and never showed emotion about anything. I watched him go pale as he pressed the headset tighter against his ear, his other hand already reaching for the red phone that connected directly to the director's office. Cunningham, isolate channel 7, now, I did. The moment I switched over, Lovell's voice filled my headset and he sounded wrong, not scared, scared I could handle. This was something else, something underneath the words. Mission Control, we have a visual anomaly at the landing site. Request immediate confirmation of survey data. His breathing was too fast. There's a structure. Repeat, there is a structure in crater Framaro. My hands moved across the console, pulling up the photographic surveys we'd taken during Apollo 10 and 12. The designated landing zone was empty. Grey regolith, a few scattered boulders, nothing remotely resembling a structure. Apollo 13, please clarify, what are you seeing? Static. Then Lovell again. It's geometric. Maybe 2 miles across. Looks like it's... Christ, it's rising. Rising out of the surface like something pushing through ice. Drummond was on the red phone, voice low and urgent. I caught fragments. Need Deke in here now. Classification protocol redshift. Terminate the mission. Apollo 13, stand by for updated telemetry. I kept my voice steady. watching my monitors as new data streamed in from the spacecraft. Radiation readings spiked, gamma levels that should have cooked the crew instantly. But they were fine, alive, talking. That's when Hayes came on the line and I could hear something close to wonder in his voice. Wrong kind of wonder. The kind that comes before you understand you should be running. Houston, the structure has markings, lights, they're activating in sequence. Hundreds of them. Pause. They look like eyes. My console started glitching, numbers scrolling backward, coordinates showing impossible positions, the spacecraft registering as being in 3 locations simultaneously. I slammed my hand on the reset switch, but the interference intensified. Then the audio feed crackled and beneath Lovell's voice I heard something else. A tone. Low, rhythmic, almost subsonic. It made my vision blur at the edges. Drummond yanked my headset off. Don't listen to it. Don't listen to what? The signal. They're broadcasting something we're not transmitting. He looked at the main screen where we tracked the spacecraft's trajectory. Command just authorized abort. We're bringing them home. But they're still 18 hours from... We're ending this now. The next 2 hours were controlled chaos. Directors I'd never seen before flooded mission control, men in suits who didn't wear NASA badges. The flight director, Kranz himself, was pulled into a closed-door meeting. When he came back out, he looked like he'd aged 10 years. The order came down at 11:53 p.m. Trigger the explosion. I didn't understand at first. Drummond had to explain it twice before it sank in. We were going to intentionally damage Apollo 13's service module, blow out the oxygen tanks, cripple the ship just enough that aborting the landing would be the only option. Make it look like mechanical failure. That's insane, I said. We could kill them. Or we save them from something worse. Drummond's hand was shaking as he initiated the sequence. You didn't see what came through on the video feed before we cut it. What video feed? He didn't answer, just kept typing, entering authorization codes that would detonate charges most people didn't even know were installed in the service module. Emergency systems, they told us during training. For catastrophic scenarios we'd never encounter. The explosion registered at 3:07 a.m. on April 14th. Exactly on schedule. The crew's panicked voices filled the channels, real panic this time, not like the hollow sound from before. This fear I understood. We spent the next 4 days bringing them home. 72 hours of calculations, trajectory burns, power rationing. The whole world watched. The miracle of Apollo 13, American heroes surviving against impossible odds. But on the far side of the moon, during those moments when we lost radio contact as they swung around the dark side, their cameras kept recording. Automatic systems, backup drives we weren't supposed to access. Drummond and I were ordered to retrieve the footage when the command module splashed down in the Pacific. We watched it in a sealed room in Building 30, just the 2 of us and a film projector. The structure had moved, not across the surface. That would have made some kind of sense. Maybe drilling equipment or rovers from a previous mission we didn't know about. No, it had moved through the lunar crust like water, relocating 12 miles in the span of 6 minutes, following Apollo 13 as they passed overhead. And in the final frame before the feed cut out, something emerged from the center of the structure. Angular, massive, defying any geometry I recognized. It didn't fly, it unfolded, like origami in reverse, becoming more complex with each second. Drummond burned the film reel right there in the trash can. We never spoke about it again. 3 weeks later, he drove his car into the Gulf of Mexico. They ruled it an accident, said he fell asleep at the wheel. But I knew better. I've spent 50 years knowing better. The dream started 6 weeks after splashdown. At first, they were fragments. Lovell's voice on the radio, that subsonic tone underneath his words. The way my console screen had shown those impossible coordinates. But by June, the dreams had solidified into something consistent, repeatable, like my subconscious was playing the same film reel every night. I'd be standing in mission control, except the room stretched impossibly long, consoles receding into darkness. The screens all showed the same image, that structure on the moon, growing larger with each frame. and I could hear it, that low-frequency tone vibrating through my bones. In the dreams, I always walked toward the main screen, always reached out to touch it, and the moment my fingers made contact, I'd wake up with my hand pressed against my bedroom wall, fingers splayed like I was trying to push through to the other side. My wife Linda noticed, started asking if I needed to see someone. I told her it was stress from the mission, that I'd be fine once things settled down. She didn't push it. That was 1970. You didn't talk about that sort of thing. But things didn't settle down. July brought the first incident. I was working late, cataloguing telemetry data from Apollo 14's upcoming mission, when I noticed something off about the archive records. Flight logs from Apollo 13 had been redacted. Nothing unusual there, given the classification. But someone had been sloppy. They'd left fragments in the backup database, pieces of transmissions that shouldn't have existed according to the official timeline. I copied them to a tape reel, tucked it into my briefcase. Stupid, probably. Definitely against the protocols I'd signed. But I needed to know if what I remembered was real, or if I'd started losing my grip on things. That night in my garage, I played the tape through a jury-rigged decoder I'd built from spare equipment. The audio quality was terrible, full of static and interference, but Lovell's voice came through clearly enough. "Houston, the lights are tracking us. It knows we're here." Then Swigert's voice, younger, more nervous. "Radiation levels just spiked again. We should be dead. Why aren't we dead?" And Hayes, barely audible. "Because it doesn't want us dead. It wants us to see." The tape ended there. I sat in my garage until 3 a.m, smoking cigarettes I'd quit 5 years earlier, trying to make sense of what "it wants us to see" could possibly mean. August. NASA announced they'd be resuming lunar missions after a brief investigation period. Apollo 14 was scheduled for February 71, Fra Mauro Crater, the same landing site Apollo 13 had been aiming for. I couldn't believe they were serious. I requested a meeting with Drummond. We met at a diner off Highway 3, far enough from the Space Center that we wouldn't run into anyone we knew. He looked worse than I felt, thinner, bags under his eyes, hands shaking as he stirred sugar into his coffee. "They're going back," I said. "Fra Mauro, same coordinates." Drummond stared out the window at the parking lot. "Different coordinates. Adjusted the landing site by 14 miles. That's not far enough, whatever that thing was. It's gone." His voice was flat. "Satellite imagery shows nothing, just normal lunar surface. They ran 3 separate surveys." "How do you know?" "Because I've been monitoring every scan they take of that region, every photograph, every infrared sweep." He finally looked at me, and I saw something broken behind his eyes. "It's not there anymore, Arthur. It's like it was never there at all." "But we saw it. Both of us. And Lovell, Swigert, Hayes, they all saw it. The crew's been debriefed extensively. They don't remember anything unusual about the mission except the explosion." He pushed his coffee away, untouched. "They've convinced themselves it was equipment malfunction, stress hallucinations. The mind does that, protects itself." "What about the footage? The film we watched?" Drummond's jaw tightened. "There was no footage. We never watched anything. You need to let this go." But I couldn't let it go. The dreams were getting worse, more vivid. In them, the structure wasn't on the moon anymore. It was closer, moving through space with that same impossible fluidity, unfolding and refolding, getting larger with each night. September brought the second incident. I woke up at 2:47 in the morning to find myself standing in my backyard, barefoot in the grass, staring up at the moon. Linda found me there, grabbed my arm, tried to pull me inside. I didn't remember leaving the house, didn't remember unlocking the back door. "You were talking," she said, voice tight with worry. "In some language I've never heard." That scared me more than anything else. I started sleeping with my bedroom door locked, key in my nightstand. If I was sleepwalking, at least I'd wake up trying to get out. But the dreams evolved. Now, when I reached for the main screen in mission control, my hand would pass through the glass like it was liquid. And on the other side, I could see the structure clearly, not as a distant shape on the moon, but up close. The surface was covered in those lights Hayes had described, thousands of them, arranged in patterns that hurt to process. Not painful exactly, just wrong, like trying to count the sides of a shape that existed in too many dimensions. October, Apollo 14 launch preparations were underway. I'd been reassigned to a different team, archive analysis, basically desk work to keep me away from active missions. They never said it was because of my breakdown, but I knew. Someone had noticed my requests for classified data, my questions about Fra Mauro, my unauthorized access to the backup telemetry archives. I went to Drummond's house one evening, unannounced. His wife answered, nice woman, someone Linda played bridge with. She told me Walter was in Colorado, visiting his brother. Except Walter didn't have a brother. I'd met his whole family at the office Christmas party. I drove to Building 30 that night, used my clearance to access the restricted archives. Drummond's personnel file had been updated, medical leave, indefinite duration. There was a note from a psychiatrist I'd never heard of, recommending intensive therapy for acute stress disorder and dissociative episodes. They'd gotten to him, medicated him probably, made him forget, or convinced him he'd imagined it all. I was next. I knew that with absolute certainty. I went home and started gathering everything I had, the tape reel, my handwritten notes from that night in Mission Control, a copy of the safety deposit box key where I'd hidden a photograph I'd managed to steal before they locked down the archives. I packed it all into a waterproof bag and buried it in my backyard at 4 a.m, marking the spot with a ceramic garden gnome Linda had bought at a garage sale. 2 days later, NASA security showed up at my house. Routine review, they said. Just needed to check my home office for any classified materials that might have been accidentally taken off-site. They were polite, professional. But they searched every inch of my study, confiscated 3 filing boxes, and reminded me that my security clearance renewal was coming up. The message was clear: conform or lose everything. I conformed. Stopped asking questions, stopped checking the archives, showed up for my desk job, analysed old trajectory data, went home at 5. Model employee. But every night, the dreams continued. And in them, the structure kept growing, getting closer, unfolding. February 5th, 1971. Apollo 14 landed in Fra Mauro crater without incident. The crew spent 33 hours on the surface, collected rocks, planted the flag, returned home heroes. Mission success. Everything by the book, except Alan Shepard came back different. I wasn't on his team. They'd buried me so deep in bureaucracy I barely saw active mission personnel anymore. But the Space Center was small enough that word traveled. Shepard had always been cocky, unshakable, the kind of man who'd stare down the devil and crack a joke. After Fra Mauro, he stopped making eye contact with people, requested early retirement 6 months later. I tried to approach him once in the parking lot after a press conference. He saw me coming and actually ran. Not walked quickly, ran. Got in his car and drove off fast enough to leave rubber on the asphalt. That's when I knew they'd seen something too. Whatever had been there in April wasn't gone. It had just learned to hide better. The dreams changed that spring. Instead of standing in mission control, I'd be on the lunar surface, inside a spacesuit that wasn't quite right, the visor too wide, the gloves too many fingers, and I'd be walking toward the structure, except now I could see it clearly. Not a building, not a machine. Something that existed in the space between those categories, surfaces that reflected light in impossible ways, angles that connected to places my mind couldn't process. In the dreams, I'd reach out to touch it. My glove would make contact, and the structure would ripple like water. And then I'd feel it inside my head. Not thoughts exactly, but the sensation of something vast trying to compress itself into the limited architecture of my brain. I'd wake up with nosebleeds, dried blood on my pillow, metallic taste in my mouth. Linda noticed. Of course she noticed. She made me see a doctor, and the doctor ordered tests. CT scan, EEG, the works. They found nothing wrong. Brain activity normal. No tumours, no lesions. The doctor suggested stress management, maybe some time off work. I took a week of vacation in June. We drove to Galveston, rented a beach house, tried to pretend everything was normal. But the moon was waxing that week, getting fuller each night, and I couldn't stop staring at it, couldn't stop thinking about what was up there waiting. On the third night, I woke up to find myself waist-deep in the Gulf of Mexico, salt water soaking my pajamas. Linda was screaming from the shore, waving a flashlight. I had no memory of leaving the beach house, no memory of walking into the water. But I remembered the dream I'd been having. I'd been on the moon again, and this time the structure had opened. Not like a door, like a flower blooming, petals of impossible geometry unfurling to reveal something inside. Something that looked at me with those 1,000 eyes Lovell had described, and I understood finally what Hayes had meant. It wanted us to see, to witness, because witnessing was the first step of something else, something worse. We cut the vacation short. Linda didn't say much on the drive home, just kept her hands tight on the steering wheel, knuckles white. That night, she locked our bedroom door from the inside and put the key in her nightstand. She thought she was protecting me from sleepwalking into traffic. She didn't understand she was locking us both in with whatever was happening to me. July. I received a package at work, no return address. Inside was a photograph, not the one I'd hidden, but a new one. Dated April 16th, 1970. 2 days after the Apollo 13 explosion. The image showed the lunar surface, but the structure was still there, smaller now, almost completely submerged back into the regolith, like it was burrowing down, hiding. Attached to the photo was a handwritten note. Drummond said you'd understand. He was wrong to burn the evidence. Some things need to be remembered. J.H. Jim Hayes, the lunar module pilot from Apollo 13. I called his listed number that evening. A woman answered. His wife, I assumed. She told me Jim wasn't available, voice tight with the kind of forced politeness that comes from repeating the same lie over and over. I asked when he'd be back. She said she didn't know. Then quieter, almost whispering, "Stop calling here. Whatever you're looking for, he can't help you. They made sure of that." The line went dead. I drove to Hayes' address that weekend. Small house in Clear Lake, well-kept lawn, American flag by the mailbox. I knocked for 10 minutes before his wife finally opened the door. Just a crack, chain lock still engaged. "He's not here," she said. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying for days. "Where is he?" "Somewhere they can help him. Somewhere he can't hurt himself." She started to close the door, then stopped. "You should know. He tried. Last month. Pills. They found him in time, but barely." "Why?" "Because he wouldn't stop talking about it. The thing he saw. The thing that saw him back." Her voice cracked. "He said it was inside his head now. That it had been inside since they flew past it. That all three of them were infected and it was just a matter of time before..." The door slammed shut. I heard her sobbing on the other side. I drove back to Houston in a daze. 3 astronauts had seen the structure up close. Drummond had been medicated into forgetting. Hayes had tried to kill himself. That left Lovell and Swaggart, and I had no way to contact them without drawing attention. But I didn't need to contact them. 2 weeks later, the news broke. Jack Swaggart had withdrawn from the astronaut program, citing personal reasons. He'd taken a job with a private aerospace company in Colorado, moved without telling anyone his new address. Running. They were all running from something they couldn't escape. August brought a heatwave that baked Houston into submission. The Space Center's air conditioning struggled to keep up, and we all moved slower, thought slower. I was cataloguing old mission data when I noticed something strange in the Apollo 12 files. The mission that had landed near Surveyor 3 months before Apollo 13. There were gaps in the photographic record. Nothing obvious, just missing frame numbers in the sequence. 3 photos that should have existed but didn't. I cross-referenced with the official mission report. According to the document, those frames had been damaged during processing. But I'd worked in photo analysis. Film doesn't damage in perfect numerical sequence. Someone had removed those images deliberately. I submitted a request to view the original negatives, knowing it would probably get flagged. 2 days later, I was called into a meeting with my supervisor and 2 men in suits I'd never seen before. They asked about my work performance, my home life, whether I was experiencing any unusual stress. Then they asked about my interest in Fra Mauro crater. I played dumb, said I was just being thorough, that cataloguing required checking cross-references. They smiled, the kind of smiles that don't reach the eyes, and told me my attention to detail was appreciated, but that some archives were sealed for national security reasons. They escorted me back to my desk, watched me work for the rest of the day, made sure I understood the message. That night, I dug up the waterproof bag from my backyard. The photograph I'd stolen was still there, sealed in plastic. I studied it under my desk lamp, looking for details I'd missed before. The structure definitely resembled something organic, branching patterns like neural networks or root systems, but made of material that reflected light in wrong ways, angles that seemed to shift depending on how long you looked. And in the upper corner, barely visible, there was something else. A second shape, smaller, hovering above the main structure. I'd dismissed it as a dust speck before, but now, looking closer, I could see it had geometric form, deliberate, artificial, or maybe not artificial, maybe just from somewhere else, operating under different rules. I put the photograph back in its plastic sleeve, but I didn't rebury it. Instead, I hid it in my study, behind a loose panel in the wall. If they came for me, I wanted it close. Evidence that I wasn't losing my mind, that what I'd seen was real. The dreams that night were the worst yet. I was on the moon, and the structure had grown to fill the entire horizon, stretching up into the black sky like a wall of impossible architecture. And I could hear it now, not the subsonic tone, but something closer to language. Words in a grammar my brain wasn't built to understand, but my subconscious translated anyway. "We've been waiting. You took so long to look up." I woke up screaming, and Linda was already out of bed, standing by the window, staring at the moon. "I had the dream too," she whispered. "The same one you've been having." And that's when I knew it was spreading. Linda didn't speak to me for 3 days after that night. She moved through the house like a ghost, making breakfast, going to her teaching job, coming home and sitting in front of the television without actually watching it. I'd catch her staring at nothing, lips moving silently like she was working through a problem she couldn't solve. On the 4th day, she finally broke the silence. "How long?" she asked over dinner neither of us was eating. "How long have you known something was wrong?" "Since April of 70, since the night we brought Apollo 13 home." "And you didn't think to tell me? To warn me?" "I thought I was protecting you." I pushed food around my plate. I thought if I kept it contained, didn't talk about it, it would stay with me. Just me. Well, it didn't. Her voice was hollow. "Last night I dreamed I was standing on the moon and something was speaking to me. Not in English, not in any language, but I understood it anyway." She finally looked at me and her eyes were bloodshot. "It said we're almost ready." "What does that mean, Arthur? Ready for what?" I had no answer. We sat in silence until the food went completely cold. The next morning, I called in sick and drove to the Houston Public Library. If NASA wouldn't let me access their classified files, maybe I could find something in the public record. I spent 6 hours in the periodical section, reading every newspaper article about the Apollo missions, looking for patterns. Apollo 11, successful landing, no incidents reported. Armstrong and Aldrin became celebrities overnight. Apollo 12, successful landing, but Conrad had mentioned something odd in a post-mission interview that most reporters ignored. He'd said the lunar surface looked different than expected in some regions, but NASA had chalked it up to lighting conditions. Apollo 13, the official story everyone knew. Explosion, dramatic rescue, safe return. Apollo 14, successful landing, but Shepard's demeanor in post-mission interviews was noticeably different, subdued, almost mechanical. I was about to leave when I found something else buried in the back pages of a scientific journal from 1969. An article about seismic monitoring equipment left on the moon by Apollo 12. The sensors had detected unusual vibrations in November 1970, rhythmic patterns that didn't match any known seismic activity. The article's author, Dr. Malcolm Greer from MIT, speculated about possible internal lunar activity, tectonic shifts in the subsurface. But the really interesting part was at the bottom. The article had been retracted 2 months after publication. No explanation given. I copied down Dr. Greer's name and the MIT contact information. That night, I tried calling him from a payphone outside a gas station. No answer. I tried again the next day. Still nothing. On the third attempt, a woman picked up, secretary from the sound of it. Dr. Greer is no longer with the university, she said. He left rather suddenly in early 71. Do you have a forwarding address? I'm afraid that information is private, but between you and me, she lowered her voice, you might try the state hospital in Worcester. I heard he was admitted there for observation. Another one. They were systematically silencing everyone who got close to the truth. I drove home, poured myself 3 fingers of whiskey even though it was barely noon, and tried to think. The pattern was clear. See the structure, or learn too much about it, and you either ran, broke down, or got institutionalized. Drummond, Hayes, Swigert, now Greer. How many others had there been? How deep did this go? Linda found me in the study that evening, the photograph spread out on my desk alongside notes I'd been compiling for over a year. You kept all this? She picked up one of the pages, skimmed my handwriting. Arthur, if they find out... They already know, they've always known. I refilled my glass. The question is what they're waiting for. Waiting for what? For it to be ready. Like you said in your dream. I pointed at the photograph. That thing on the moon. It's not just sitting there. It's doing something. Growing, maybe. Preparing. Linda sat down heavily in the chair across from me. You sound insane. You know that, right? Yeah, but you dreamed it too. So either we're both insane, or something's actually happening. She didn't argue, just stared at the photograph, at those impossible angles and the strange lights arranged in patterns that made your eyes water if you looked too long. What do we do? She finally asked. I don't know, but I think I need to find Jim Lovell. Lovell was still with NASA, still flying. Apollo 17 was scheduled for December 72, and he was rumored to be on the backup crew. If anyone knew the full truth about what happened during Apollo 13, it was him. But getting to Lovell meant going through layers of security I no longer had clearance for. Unless I caught him somewhere unofficial, I spent 2 weeks tracking his schedule through gossip and overheard conversations at the Space Center. Lovell had a routine. Thursday nights, he'd have dinner at a steakhouse near Clear Lake. Usually alone, sometimes with other astronauts, but always the same place. On Thursday, September 23rd, I waited in the parking lot until I saw him arrive. Alone, thank God. I gave him 15 minutes to order, then walked inside and slid into the booth across from him before he could protest. You need to leave, he said immediately, not looking up from his menu. Right now. I know what you saw up there. What all 3 of you saw. I don't know what you're talking about. The structure, Fra Mauro, the thing that moved across the surface and followed you. I kept my voice low. The thing that's in your head now. Lovell's jaw tightened. He set down the menu, finally meeting my eyes. He looked older than his years, worn down by something that went beyond the stress of spaceflight. Cunningham, right? You were on console that night. Third shift, I heard the original transmissions before they were sanitized. Then you know enough to get yourself disappeared. He glanced around the restaurant, checking for familiar faces. They're watching all of us. Everyone who was there. Everyone who knows. Why? What are they protecting? Not protecting. Containing. He leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. That thing on the moon. It's not the first time. Apollo 11 saw something too, but it was dormant then. Just sitting there. Armstrong kept his mouth shut about it and they let him retire quietly. But Apollo 12 woke it up somehow. Conrad's landing site was too close, and the vibrations from the module touchdown triggered something. What did it trigger? A response. The structure started activating, growing, sending signals into space. We thought it was a relay station at first, maybe left by another civilization. But during Apollo 13, when we got close enough, we realized it wasn't sending signals out. His hands were shaking. It was calling something down. The whiskey I'd drunk earlier turned to acid in my stomach. You mean something's coming here? No, I mean it's already here. Been here since 1970. Just waiting in orbit, staying out of sight, letting that thing on the moon do its work. Lovell pushed his untouched water glass aside. The dreams everyone's having. That's not trauma, it's preparation, making us ready to perceive them when they finally show themselves. Ready for what? I don't know, but whatever it is, it's almost time. The dreams are getting stronger, spreading to more people. My wife has them now, my kids. It's not just the astronauts anymore, it's everyone who looks at the moon long enough. He stood up, dropped cash on the table. Stop digging, Cunningham. Forget everything you think you know, because the alternative is ending up like Hayes, or worse. He paused at the booth's edge. They gave us a choice after the mission. Forget, or remember and spend the rest of our lives wishing we hadn't. I chose wrong. He walked out, leaving me alone with a truth that felt like poison. October 1972. The dreams became unbearable. Not just for Linda and me, the entire neighborhood seemed to be suffering from collective insomnia. Mrs. Kowalski next door started leaving her porch light on all night. The Hendersons across the street painted their garage door black, then white again, then black. When I asked why, Bill Henderson just shrugged and said he couldn't sleep unless it was the right color, though he couldn't explain what the right color was. At work, people moved through the halls with the shuffling exhaustion of the chronically sleep-deprived. Coffee consumption tripled, sick days doubled. Nobody talked about it directly, but you could see it in their eyes, that distant, haunted look of people who'd seen something they couldn't unsee. And every night, the moon got a little brighter in the dreams, a little closer. I'd started keeping a journal, documenting everything, the dreams, the patterns, names of people who'd been silenced or disappeared. I hid it with the photograph, behind the loose panel in my study. If something happened to me, at least there'd be a record. On October 12th, I received a second package at work. Same anonymous style as before, manila envelope, no return address. Inside was a photograph taken from lunar orbit, dated September 1972. Apollo 17's reconnaissance mission, though that hadn't been made public yet. The structure in Fra Mauro had grown. Not just expanded, transformed. What had been a 2-mile formation now stretched nearly 15 miles across, geometric patterns branching out like crystalline growths. And in the center, something new had emerged, a vertical spire that reached up from the lunar surface like a finger pointing at Earth. Attached was another handwritten note. They're launching Apollo 17 in December anyway. God help us all. MS. MS. Could be a dozen people, but my money was on Mitchell Sawyer, a photo analyst I'd worked with during Apollo 12. Smart guy, meticulous, the kind who noticed when negatives went missing. I tried calling his extension, disconnected, asked around. Nobody had seen him in 3 weeks. His desk had been cleared out, reassigned to someone else. That night, I showed Linda the new photograph. She studied it for a long time, fingers tracing the edge of the spire. It looks like a transmitter, she said finally, or an antenna. That's what I thought. Arthur, what if Lovell was right? What if something really is waiting up there, and this is how they communicate with it? She set the photo down, hands shaking. What happens when Apollo 17 gets close to it? I don't know, but I think we need to find out who else knows about this. Build a list of everyone who's been compromised or silenced. Over the next 2 weeks, I became obsessed. I spent every free moment researching, cross-referencing names and dates, building a timeline of everyone who'd gotten too close to the truth. The pattern was damning. Dr. Malcolm Greer, institutionalized, November 1971. Mitchell Sawyer, disappeared, September 1972. Walter Drummond, medicated into compliance, late 1970. Jim Hayes, suicide attempt, committed involuntarily, July 1971. Jack Swigert, fled to Colorado, whereabouts currently unknown. And there were others I hadn't known about. A journalist from the Houston Chronicle who'd written about irregularities in Apollo mission photography, killed in a car accident 3 months later. A contractor who'd worked on lunar seismic equipment. House fire, no survivors. A secretary in Building 30 who'd been caught copying classified documents, resigned, and moved to Alaska. The body count was higher than I'd imagined. These people weren't just being silenced, they were being eliminated. I showed my research to Linda on a Tuesday night, spread out across our kitchen table like evidence in a murder investigation. She looked at it all, then looked at me. "We need to go public with this," she said. "Newspapers, television, something. They'll discredit us. Call us conspiracy theorists, paranoid. They've had years to perfect the cover-up. So what do we do? Just wait until whatever's up there decides to show itself?" Before I could answer, the phone rang. I almost didn't pick up. It was past 11, and late calls never brought good news. But something made me answer. Heavy breathing on the other end. Then a voice I barely recognized, hoarse and strained. "Cunningham?" "It's Jack. Jack Swigert." I grabbed a pen, started writing. "Where are you?" "Doesn't matter. Listen, I don't have much time. They're monitoring all the lines, but I needed to warn you." His words came fast, panicked. "It's accelerating. The timeline. They moved up Apollo 17's launch because the structure is becoming visible from Earth. Amateur astronomers are starting to notice anomalies in Framauro. They can't hide it much longer." "What's the structure for? What's it doing?" "It's a beacon. A marker. We put 12 men on the moon between 69 and 72, and every landing activated another part of it. Apollo 17 will complete the sequence." Static crackled through the line. They knew. NASA knew from the beginning. That's why they rushed the program, packed so many missions into 3 years. They wanted to finish before anyone realized what they were helping build. "You're saying the moon landings were intentional, that we were supposed to activate this thing?" "Not NASA, higher up than that. Government, military, I don't know exactly who. But someone's been in contact with whatever's out there since the early 60s. The space program was never about beating the Soviets. It was about fulfilling our end of a bargain." "What bargain?" "I don't know. But the price is about to come due." His breathing grew more ragged. "Cunningham, when Apollo 17 launches, you need to be somewhere far from the coast, somewhere inland, the first impact zones." The line went dead, not disconnected, dead, like someone had cut the power to the entire phone system. I immediately tried calling back. Nothing, no dial tone. I checked other phones in the house, all dead. Linda was standing in the doorway, face pale. What did he mean by impact zones? Before I could speculate, every light in the house went out. Then the streetlights outside. Then, looking through the window, I could see the entire neighborhood had gone dark. A rolling blackout spreading outward from our house like ripples in water. We stood in the darkness, listening to car alarms start up and down the street, watching as confused neighbors emerged onto their porches with flashlights. The power came back 30 minutes later as suddenly as it had gone. No explanation from the electric company, no official statement, just one of those things that happens sometimes. But I knew better. That was a demonstration, a reminder that they could reach us whenever they wanted. The next morning, I didn't go to work. Instead, I drove to a hardware store and bought a lockbox, the kind with a combination only I would know. I packed everything I'd collected into it, the photographs, my journal, copies of the mission data I'd stolen, the timeline of silenced witnesses, everything. Then I drove out to Galveston, to the beach where Linda and I had vacationed. I walked down to the waterline and buried the box in the sand, marking the spot with GPS coordinates I memorized rather than wrote down. If something happened to me, if I ended up like Drummond or Hayes or any of the others, at least the evidence would survive. I got back to Houston just before noon. There was a black sedan parked in my driveway. 2 men in suits sitting inside watching the house. They saw me pull up, made no attempt to hide their presence. Just sat there, engines idling, making sure I knew they were waiting. I drove past my own house, circled the block, pulled into a strip mall parking lot a quarter mile away, called Linda from a payphone. "There are men at the house," I said. "Don't go home." "Arthur, what's happening?" "Swigert called last night. Someone knows. Pack a bag, get somewhere public, and wait for me to call you back." "Where are you going?" "To find Jim Lovell." He said they gave him a choice. Forget or remember. I need to know what he remembers that he hasn't told me yet. I hung up before she could argue. Lovell was scheduled to be at the Space Center that afternoon for a meeting about Apollo 17's mission parameters. I waited in the parking garage, 3 levels up where security cameras had blind spots. Waited for 2 hours until I saw him walking toward his car, alone. I stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. He saw me and stopped, eyes widening. "You need to leave," he said, glancing around nervously. "Right now. They know you've been digging." "I know about the bargain," Swigert told me. Lovell's face went white. He shouldn't have. Jesus, Cunningham, he shouldn't have said anything. "What happens when Apollo 17 completes the sequence?" "I don't know the specifics. They kept most of it compartmentalized. But I know what I saw during Apollo 13, in those last minutes before we lost visual contact." He moved closer, voice dropping to barely audible. "The structure opened. Something came out. Not a ship, not a machine. Something that existed in multiple states simultaneously, and it looked at us, really looked, like it was reading our genetic code, our history, everything we were. And then what? Then it went back inside, waiting. But before it did, I heard something in my head. Not words, just understanding. A message. His hands were shaking badly now. It said, "Thank you for waking us. When the circle closes, we'll return the favor." What does that mean? Return what favor? "I think we're about to find out." Lovell backed toward his car. "Apollo 17 launches December 7th. That's when the circle closes. That's when we find out what we've really done." He got in his car and drove away, leaving me standing in the concrete shadows with the weight of revelation crushing down. We hadn't discovered something on the moon, we'd released it. And in 6 weeks, it was coming home. November 1972. Linda and I became ghosts in our own lives. We moved between motels, paying cash, never staying more than 2 nights in one place. I'd withdrawn our savings before the men in suits could freeze our accounts. $8,000 that had to last until... what? Until Apollo 17 launched. Until whatever was coming arrived. I'd lost my job, obviously. Resigned due to personal circumstances, the official record would say. Linda had called her school, told them she had a family emergency. We couldn't risk going back to the house, couldn't risk being found, but the dreams followed us anyway. Geography didn't matter. The thing on the moon knew where we were, could reach into our sleeping minds regardless of which cheap motel we'd holed up in. The dreams were different now, more detailed. I could see Earth from the moon's perspective, our planet hanging in the black sky like a blue marble, and I could feel the structure's attention focusing, narrowing, preparing for something vast. On November 15th, I read in a newspaper that amateur astronomers had reported unusual reflections in the Fra Mauro region. NASA dismissed it as ice deposits catching sunlight at particular angles. But the reports kept coming. People with backyard telescopes, university observatories, anyone looking at the right spot at the right time, they all saw the anomaly. The structure was becoming visible. Soon, everyone would see it. We were in a motel outside Austin when I decided to risk contacting someone I'd been avoiding. Eugene Novak, my old supervisor from the Apollo 12 mission, the one person at NASA who'd always seemed trustworthy. If anyone would listen, it might be him. I called from a payphone, praying his line wasn't monitored. "Cunningham," his voice was cautious. Where the hell have you been? Eugene, I need to know something. Apollo 12's seismic data from November 1970. Do you still have access to the raw numbers? Silence on the line. Then, why are you asking about that? Because I think the vibrations detected weren't natural. I think Conrad's landing triggered something, and NASA's been covering it up ever since. More silence, long enough that I thought he might have hung up. Then, meet me tomorrow. Zilker Park, noon, by the Botanical Gardens. Come alone. He disconnected before I could respond. Linda wanted to come with me, but I insisted she stay at the motel. If this was a trap, no point in both of us getting caught. I drove to Austin the next morning, arriving 40 minutes early to scout the location. Zilker Park was open, public, plenty of witnesses if something went wrong. Novak showed up exactly at noon, carrying a briefcase and looking like he'd aged a decade since I'd last seen him. He sat on the bench beside me, didn't make eye contact. You were right to run, he said quietly. They've been asking about you. Where you went, who you've contacted. I told them I didn't know. The seismic data was falsified. The real readings showed patterns that couldn't occur naturally, rhythmic pulses like a heartbeat emanating from deep beneath Fra Mauro. He opened his briefcase, pulled out a folder. I made copies before they classified everything. Figured someone should have them just in case. I took the folder, hands shaking. Inside were graphs showing seismic activity, timestamps, analysis notes. And there, in Novak's handwriting, pattern repeats every 27.3 days. Lunar rotation cycle. Source is tracking Earth. It's been watching us since Apollo 12, I said, tracking our planet as the moon orbits. Not just watching, calculating. Novak glanced around nervously. I've been monitoring radio telescopes that point at the moon. For the past 6 months, there's been microwave transmission emanating from Fra Mauro. Very low frequency, almost undetectable. It's sending data somewhere. Sending what? I don't know. But the transmission rate increased after Apollo 14 landed, and again after Apollo 15 and 16. Each landing added more data to the stream. He closed his briefcase. Apollo 17 launches in 3 weeks if the pattern holds. The transmission completes, I finished. Whatever bargain was made, we're about to fulfill our end. Novak stood up, ready to leave. Then he paused, turned back. Cunningham, there's something else. Last week, a radio telescope in New Mexico detected a response transmission. Not from the moon, from somewhere past Mars. Deep space. Whatever that structure is communicating with, it answered back. He walked away before I could ask anything else, disappearing into the afternoon crowd. I sat on that bench for an hour reading through the seismic data, understanding finally what we'd done. Every moon landing had been a data point, a measurement. The structure had been studying us, cataloguing human biology, behavior, technology. And now it had enough information. Now it was ready. I drove back to the motel in a daze. Linda took one look at my face and knew. How bad? Worse than I thought. I showed her the folder. There's something in deep space. The structure has been talking to it. And after Apollo 17, it's coming here. She sat down heavily on the motel bed. So, what do we do? Try to stop the launch? How? We're fugitives. No one would listen. And even if they did, I don't think it matters anymore. The sequence is too far along. I poured myself water from the bathroom tap, hands still shaking. But maybe we can warn people. Get the information out somehow. They'll discredit us. Call it a hoax. Probably. But we have to try. Over the next week, we compiled everything. Photographs, documents, testimony from Lovell and Swigert, the seismic data from Novak. I wrote it all up in a detailed report, 30 pages of evidence that NASA had been knowingly activating an alien device on the moon. The question was where to send it. Newspapers would dismiss it. Television stations would laugh us out. We needed someone credible, someone with reach. Linda suggested Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America. If anyone could get the story told, it was him. On November 28th, I mailed copies to 3 different addresses: Cronkite's office at CBS, the New York Times, and a congressman who'd been vocal about government transparency. Sent them all from different cities, different post offices, hoping at least one would get through. Then we waited. December arrived with unseasonable cold. The news was full of Apollo 17 preparations, the final moon mission, the grand finale of humanity's greatest achievement. Interviews with the crew, technical briefings, public excitement building. No one mentioned Fra Mauro. No one talked about the structure that amateur astronomers were now photographing regularly. NASA continued dismissing the reports as optical illusions, but the photographic evidence was mounting. Online forums were filling up with theories, speculation, grainy images showing geometric patterns that shouldn't exist. On December 4th, 3 days before launch, Walter Cronkite's office called. Not Cronkite himself, but a producer. She wanted to meet, said they'd received my package and had questions. It felt like a trap, but it also felt like our last chance. We drove to Houston, meeting the producer at a diner far from NASA's jurisdiction. She was younger than I expected, professional, skeptical. She laid out my report on the table between us. "This is quite a story, Mr. Cunningham. You understand how it sounds." Like I'm insane, I know. I pushed the photographs toward her. "But look at the evidence. Look at what's really on the moon." She studied the images, her skepticism wavering. These could be faked. They could. But they're not. I leaned forward. "You want proof? Watch Apollo 17. Watch what happens when they approach Fra Mauro. The structure will react. It has every time. And this time, it'll complete whatever sequence we've been building toward." The producer gathered up the materials, put them back in her briefcase. "I'll bring this to Mr. Cronkite, but I can't promise anything. This would be controversial, doesn't even begin to cover it." "I know, but if I'm right, you'll have 3 days to decide whether humanity deserves a warning." She left without committing to anything. Linda and I sat in the diner for another hour, drinking bad coffee, wondering if we'd just wasted our last card. That night, the dreams changed again. Instead of standing on the moon, I was standing on Earth, looking up at the sky. And I could see them coming. Not ships, not anything mechanical. Just presence. Vast, incomprehensible presence folding through space toward us, drawn by the beacon we'd so helpfully activated. In the dream, the sky began to change color. Not dark to light, but into shades that had no names, colors that existed outside human perception. And I understood finally what "return the favor" meant. They'd been waiting in the dark for eons, unable to perceive our reality, locked in dimensions adjacent to ours. The structure was a bridge. The moon landings provided the energy, the data, the biological templates needed to build that bridge. And once they crossed over, they would change everything. Not destroy, change. Remake reality according to rules that had nothing to do with physics as we understood it. I woke up gasping, Linda already awake beside me, tears streaming down her face. "I saw it too," she whispered. "We all did." Everyone on Earth had the same dream tonight. I turned on the television. Early morning news was already reporting on it. Mass nightmares, millions of people waking up simultaneously, all describing the same impossible vision. Social media was exploding. Emergency hotlines were overwhelmed. The world was waking up to what was coming. But Apollo 17 was still launching in 3 days, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. December 7th, 1972, launch day. The world didn't stop. Despite the mass nightmares, despite the mounting evidence, despite the photographs now showing clear geometric structures in Fra Mauro, Apollo 17 was still greenlit. NASA issued statements about collective anxiety and mass hysteria. The president went on television to assure everyone that the space program was safe, that America's final moon mission would be a triumph. I watched it all from a motel room in Cocoa Beach, Florida. Linda and I had driven through the night, drawn by some compulsion we couldn't name. If the world was going to end, we wanted to watch it happen from where humanity's reach for the stars had begun. The beaches were packed, thousands of people gathered to watch the launch, but the atmosphere was wrong. No excitement, no celebration, just a grim determination to witness whatever came next. People held their children close, couples stood in silence, some prayed. At 12:33 a.m., Apollo 17 lifted off from Kennedy Space Center. The Saturn V rocket tore through the night sky, carrying Gene Cernan, Ronald Evans, and Harrison Schmitt toward their destiny, toward ours. I watched the flames, listened to the thunder, and knew we'd just sealed whatever fate had been arranged for us. The first 3 days of the mission were routine: orbital mechanics, course corrections, the familiar rhythm of space travel. News coverage was constant but nervous. Amateur astronomers reported that the Fra Mauro structure was glowing now, faint bioluminescence visible even through small telescopes. NASA continued denying anything unusual. Then, on December 10th, as Apollo 17 entered lunar orbit, the structure responded. I was watching the live broadcast when it happened. The official feed showed normal lunar surface, grey regolith, familiar craters, but someone at the network had split-screened amateur telescope footage alongside it, and the difference was stark. The amateur feed showed Fra Mauro erupting with light, patterns racing across the structure's surface like neural signals firing. The broadcast cut out for 30 seconds. When it returned, the anchor looked shaken, listening to something in his earpiece. Then Cronkite himself appeared on screen, the report I'd sent him apparently enough to justify breaking protocol. "We're receiving unconfirmed reports," Cronkite said carefully, "that Apollo 17 has detected unusual electromagnetic activity near their landing site. NASA has not officially commented, but we're hearing that the crew may be experiencing communication difficulties." The screen changed to audio only. Mission Control's backup channel, someone had leaked it to the press. And through the static, I heard Cernan's voice, strained but controlled. "Houston, we have visual confirmation of the structure. It's approximately 15 miles in diameter, centered in Fra Mauro. The surface is... Jesus, it's moving. The patterns are shifting." Mission Control's response was pure professional calm, but I could hear the tension underneath. "Copy that, Apollo 17. We're analyzing the data now. Proceed with landing sequence as planned." "Houston, I don't think you understand. This thing is reacting to our presence. It's..." The feed cut entirely, every station, every broadcast, complete media blackout. Linda grabbed my hand. "Arthur, what's happening?" "The sequence is completing." Just like Lovell said. I tried to find another channel, anything with information. Nothing, just emergency broadcast signals and static. Then my head exploded with pain, not physical pain, something worse. A pressure behind my eyes, a sensation of something vast, forcing itself into the limited space of my consciousness. Around me, people in the motel started screaming. Through the window, I could see others on the beach collapsing, hands pressed to their temples. The collective dream had returned, but this time we were awake. I saw the moon from orbit, saw the structure opening like a flower, petals of impossible geometry unfolding into dimensions my brain couldn't process. Saw something emerging, not rising from the surface, but phasing into reality from somewhere adjacent, somewhere that had always been there but we'd never had eyes to see. It was vast, not in the sense of size, but in the sense of presence. A consciousness so large it made humanity seem like bacteria, our entire civilization a brief chemical reaction on the surface of an unremarkable planet. And it was curious. That was the most terrifying part. Not hostile, not malevolent, just intensely, incomprehensibly curious about what we were, what we'd built, how we functioned. The vision released us. I found myself on the motel floor, Linda beside me, both of us gasping. Outside, people were slowly getting to their feet, helping each other up, everyone wearing the same expression of shell-shocked understanding. The broadcasts returned. Cronkite was back on screen, and he'd clearly experienced the same thing we all had. His composure was gone, replaced by something between awe and terror. "What we just experienced," he said slowly, "appears to have been a global phenomenon. Reports are coming in from every continent. Everyone felt it. Everyone saw..." He paused, struggling for words. "NASA has just issued a statement. Apollo 17 has completed its landing. The crew reports they are unharmed, but they're describing the structure as having undergone significant transformation. The screen cut to footage, not from NASA's cameras, but from someone's backyard telescope, uploaded to local news. The structure in Fra Mauro had changed. The geometric patterns had reorganized into something that looked almost organic, and at its center, a vertical beam of light shot straight up from the lunar surface, visible even in daylight. Not a beam, a bridge. Over the next 6 hours, the world watched as our reality began to change. The transformation started subtly, colors seeming slightly off, shadows falling at wrong angles, people reporting they could hear sounds that had no source. But it accelerated. By evening, the changes were undeniable. The stars looked different, arranged in patterns that matched no constellation we'd mapped. The moon itself seemed closer, larger, its surface details visible with impossible clarity. And through it all, that beam of light connecting lunar surface to some point in space we couldn't quite perceive. Something was crossing the bridge, multiple somethings, presences that existed in frequencies outside normal human perception, but we were being tuned to their wavelength, adjusted like a radio dial searching for signal. I stood on the beach with Linda and hundreds of others, watching the sky change. Someone near us was crying. Someone else laughed, the broken sound of a mind trying to process the impossible. A child asked their mother if the angels had come. The mother had no answer. Cronkite's voice came through a radio someone had brought. NASA has lost contact with Apollo 17. The last transmission from Commander Cernan indicated the crew was preparing for an unscheduled EVA to approach the structure. They reported feeling compelled to, and I'm quoting here, complete the introduction. Introduction to what? Linda whispered. I didn't answer. I thought I knew. We hadn't discovered an alien artifact on the moon. We'd built an invitation. Every landing, every footprint, every flag planted had been part of an unconscious ritual, guided by influences we'd mistaken for our own ambition. The space race wasn't about beating the Soviets. It was about fulfilling a requirement we'd never understood we were accepting. And now the invited guests were arriving. The night sky split open. Not literally, there was no tear, no wound in space. But perception itself cracked, and through that crack we could see layers of reality we'd never known existed. Dimensions folded like origami, revealing spaces between spaces, geometries that violated every law of physics we'd spent centuries establishing. And in those spaces, things moved. Vast, ancient, operating under rules so different from ours that calling them alive or dead, machine or organism, seemed equally wrong. They'd been there all along, separated from us by a barrier so fundamental we'd mistaken it for the basic structure of reality itself. The moon landings had weakened that barrier. The structure was a translator, a converter, making frequencies compatible. And Apollo 17's completion of the sequence had opened the door. People around me were changing. Not physically, not yet, but in their perception. I heard a woman describing colors that had no names. A man pointing at the sky and counting dimensions like a child counting fingers. An elderly couple holding hands, seeing each other truly for the first time, understanding the layers of existence their love had always bridged without them knowing. Linda turned to me and her eyes were different. Still her, still human, but aware now of so much more. We're not ending, she said, we're expanding. She was right. The terror I'd felt was dissolving, replaced by something like wonder. Whatever was coming through wasn't here to destroy us. It was here to include us, to add humanity to a conversation that had been happening for eons, in frequencies we'd never been able to hear. The price of knowledge, the return favor Lovell had mentioned. They'd woken up. Now they were waking us up too. I looked at the moon, at that beam of light bridging impossible distances, and I understood finally what the structure had been doing all along. Not threatening, not invading, calling, and we'd answered. Above us, the stars began to rearrange themselves into patterns that made sense for the first time in human history. Not because they were moving, but because we were finally seeing them correctly, understanding the connections that had always been there. Apollo 17 transmitted one final message before their frequency shifted beyond our equipment's ability to receive. Cernan's voice, calm and filled with wonder. "Houston, we understand now. Tell everyone. Tell them we were never alone. We were just waiting to be ready." The transmission ended, not with static, just silence. The kind of silence that comes before everything changes. 3 months later, I'm still writing this from that Motel 6 in Alamogordo. The fire that destroyed my house was real. I watched the news footage myself. But I don't need the house anymore. None of us need the things we used to need. The world didn't end on December 7th, 1972. It transformed. Most people can see it now, the additional layers of reality that were always there, vibrating at frequencies just beyond our old perception. Buildings look different because we can see their atomic structure, the quantum probability clouds that determine where walls really are versus where we think they are. The sky has 17 new colors that didn't exist before, or maybe they always existed and we were just blind to them. Some people couldn't handle the expansion. About 3% of the global population retreated into catatonia, their minds unable to process the additional dimensions. They're being cared for in hospitals that are themselves learning to exist in multiple states simultaneously. Doctors say some of them might adjust eventually, others might not. The choice to evolve apparently isn't universal. Linda sees more than I do. She always had better intuition, and that translated into better perception once the barrier fell. She can communicate with what came through, not in language, but in something deeper. Pure concept, emotion as data, thought as geometry. She tried explaining it to me once, but I'm still learning the grammar. The Apollo 17 crew never came home, not in any traditional sense. Their bodies are still on the moon, but they're not dead. They exist in a state that makes those categories meaningless, here and there simultaneously, human and something else, anchoring the bridge between our reality and the others that were always adjacent to it. Sometimes I can feel Cernun's presence when I look at the moon, a vast contentment, like someone who spent their whole life searching and finally found what they were looking for. NASA officially shut down 3 weeks after the transformation. No need for a space program when space itself turned out to be far more accessible than we'd imagined. You don't need rockets when reality has backdoors built into its architecture. Children are learning to perceive them in schools, the same way we used to learn mathematics. The photograph that arrived in my mailbox, the one that started this confession, sits on the nightstand beside my bed. I look at it sometimes, at that grainy image of something impossible becoming possible, and I try to remember what terror felt like, that pure, simple fear of the unknown. It's hard to recall now. Hard to be afraid when the universe keeps revealing itself to be stranger and more beautiful than we ever imagined. Hard to regret the choices that led us here, even the people we lost along the way. Drummond's death stopped being a tragedy once I understood where he went. Hayes didn't fail at suicide. He succeeded at something else, transitioning early to a state the rest of us would eventually reach. Swiggert's last words about impact zones weren't a warning about destruction. They were about the impact of expanded consciousness hitting a species that had been dreaming too small. The cancer is still killing me. That hasn't changed. Expanded perception doesn't cure pancreatic failure, doesn't stop cells from forgetting how to die properly. But I'm not afraid anymore. Death is just another barrier, another frequency shift, another room in a house much larger than I ever understood. In my dreams now, I don't see the moon. I see what's beyond it, what's beyond everything. And it's watching back with those 1,000 eyes Lovell described, curious and patient and impossibly vast. Waiting for the rest of us to be ready. We're getting there, one transformation at a time.